Righto. Well, thank you to those who have joined us this morning for this AWCI webinar in conjunction with Potter Interiors. We appreciate you coming along. We are going to record the webinar just so that anyone from your company or other members can have a look at it a bit later. So we appreciate you coming along. Obviously here today with us, we've got Josh Heppy from Potter Interior Systems. So welcome, Josh. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very good. As you're aware, we're going to cover accurate quantity takeoffs for Potter's aluminium partitions. Josh is going to cover a few things like minimum requirements, work through some examples, and of course, things that are often overlooked. Happy to take questions at any time. Either use the chat function or the Q&A function down the bottom of your screens, and we'll either cover those as we go or happy to take some questions at the end as well. So without any further ado, I might hand over to Josh and he'll do the main bit. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Cheers, Richard. I guess I'll just start sharing the presentation. So let me try and do that real quick. Cool. Is that coming through okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, as Richard said before, guys, our team, thank you for tuning in today or via the recording. My name's Josh Heppy. I've been with Potters for 9, almost 10 years, and I've been in different roles in the company. Moved around a little bit with Potters. One of the roles I had was the branch manager in Wellington, so I was on the coalface of things, dealing with the logistics and the issues that come on site, or with regards to remedial work or issues with hardware, all that kind of stuff. So I've done that for years now, and I kind of wanted to try and tackle some of that in this presentation, along with how to get accurate quantities for the Potter's partitioning systems. So I'm the technical specification manager now for the North Island for the walls part of the business. As you'll see, as we go through this, it's really around accuracy more than anything else. And just to give you some tips and tricks along the way. This will take about 30 minutes, hopefully. But if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to put your hand up or chuck a question into the Q&A box or the chat. Today, these are some of the things I wanted to cover. I think Richard's said it already, but just to reiterate, I want to go through some of the minimum requirements needed or necessary for an accurate takeoff. We'll look at some of the things, the key considerations, some things to think about in the back of your mind when you're doing a takeoff. I'll work through some typical doors and windows. And I'll preface this by saying that this assumes that you've already got a decent understanding of the differences in our suites, a rough idea of how they go together. And so we're more looking at how to work out the accuracy of the doors and windows. We'll tick off some of the things that are overlooked in a takeoff or when supplied. We'll go through some tags. Most people will already have a good list of tags. You already have, things that you copy and paste, but we'll just I'll just make sure I go through a couple of things to make sure you're covering off as well. And then we'll just do just a little bit on what to do when there is very, very little info on the plans. For example, you've got a napkin drawing and you've got to try and work out quantities, and just give you some tips on how to do that. So, and this is in my opinion, and this is from me doing takeoffs for a long time now. This is the minimum requirements I think you need for accurate takeoffs. So I definitely think that an RCP, or reflected ceiling plane, and elevations are key. And to give you an idea of why, this is a snippet from an RCP. And as you can see here, the ceiling height is around 2560, and sometimes you don't have elevations, and sometimes you don't have 3D renders to find out what the size of a door, where the partition sits in relation to the ceiling. So if let's say, for example, you have a door schedule and it shows you that the height is 2400 high, but you actually, your ceiling's at 2560. The reason that's important to try to compare the two is that sometimes it's the difference between two profiles to form a head sill for your glazing, which is your, in this case, a head track with a snapping cap, versus a one piece if you've got jib up to the ceiling line. So these are just a couple of things to consider. Next up is I think a floor plan with the wall types and ideally the door and window numbers. So most of you are probably aware that some of the plans don't always kind of match up. So the details might not necessarily match what's on the wall type guide, or the window schedule doesn't align with the door detail types. And it is always good to have the wall types guide. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a typical detail and it's copy and pasted from our spec manual or from our DWG, and it shows a 90mm stud, typical A132 system with a aluminium door. But then you reference it on the plan, which shows that it's coming off this type of wall, which if you dig a bit deeper, in this case, it's 2 layers of jib on one side, a 92mm steel stud, and then 2 layers of jib on the other side. So this system, or this typical detail that might have been supplied, doesn't actually work. And so why that's important is then you have to supply a larger jam. So if you've allowed for what's on the typical detail and you haven't referenced it back to the wall type plan, by the time you come to install, if you haven't allowed for the wider profile, it's just eating into your margin because you're having to buy a wider profile, which costs a bit extra. Not all plans have a door and window schedule, but if there is one, then big tick. It's way easier to then compare your door and windows to the floor plan. A lot of plans don't have typical details, but if they do, again, having those as a minimum requirement for accuracy is key, because then you can work out exactly what the designer is wanting. The series type, in lieu of typical details and other things, if you've got at least a series type called out somewhere, either in the specification or somewhere, if you can pull that out, then it's much easier, again, to get an accurate takeoff. And one thing that's often overlooked by a lot of people is the glazing spec. And the glazing specification can be in a number of different places, actually. So it could be in the kind of contents page at the start. It could be on the door and window schedule. It could be in the specification. It could be written somewhere on the floor plan. But the glazing spec can actually dictate a few things. It can dictate the type of door style you have to use. It could dictate that you have to use a wider mullion, or consider how to get glass in. So, for example, if the glazing specification is actually called out as, say, a 30mm hush or a 12mm glazing, then we have to try and consider deeper pockets for shuffle glazing. If we've got 2 fixed pockets and 1 pane of glass, we have to consider wider door styles to accommodate the thicker glazing. So it is important to try and get your glazing spec, to trawl through your plans to find that, because that might mean that you have to change details. And what you don't want to do is come to ordering the materials. You've already done a takeoff for smaller components, but then you're having to up spec everything. And, they could argue that it's at your cost for not picking that up at the takeoff stage. So glazing spec is important where possible. Often it might just be the glazing spec is just as per the glazing code, NZS 4223, and then you just install what works, but sometimes it's all called out. All right, so some of the key considerations, I believe, around takeoffs and accurate takeoffs is I think that the really ideally you should work out your takeoffs based on each door and window. So I guess the typical measurement, typical way of measuring for quantity for QSs is to take a measurement and then times that by linear meter rate. And I don't think that always works for aluminium partitions. I think sometimes it can. And I'll give you a couple of examples of where it won't work for aluminium partitions. It is if you, for example, you're dealing with, say, a 3 meter high partition. Most of our profiles are 5.6 meters long. And if you've got 3 meter high partitions, that means you're cutting your vertical members to, say, 3 meters, and you have a 2.6 meter offcut. And in most cases on that project, you won't be able to use that offcut. So that becomes wastage. So if you haven't allowed for it, if you're measuring out by linear meters and then allowing a 5 or 10% wastage into your margin, if you're offcutting 2.6 meters, you're probably more around 40% wastage. So it is, I guess, more accurate to work out that each door and window based on your project. And another example is if, for example, you've got 4 meter wide windows and you've got a 5.6 meter length. If you're lopping off 1.6 meters, there is a chance that you won't be able to use that horizontal member elsewhere. So you might then have, again, 1.6 meters of wastage, which is a lot more than your 5 or 10% that you might build in. So when I work out quantities, I tend to work out each door and window, how I can work it out by length at 5.6 meters. You can lop it in half, which is 2.8, lop off the ends. And so ideally a 2.7 high partition, you can cut it in half, a 5.6 meter profile, sorry, and then you have 2 lengths. Sometimes designers don't design partitions to have a bead, and if you're you do need to allow for a bead on one side, ideally the bottom. So just think about that. If you're doing a takeoff based on plans, allow for a bead on the bottom at least. If you're supplying hardware, say door furniture, if you have a 75 or 100 mil door style, then we have to consider that you need a narrow back set. So something like a 38 mil back set, which tends to be around about twice the cost of a standard 60 mil back set for a mortar slog. So it is something to consider if you're supplying hardware. If sometimes the spec calls out a 60 mil mortar slog, 60 mil back set on a mortar slog, but that doesn't necessarily fit with what the door style is. So it's just something to consider. The 120 mil door style will accommodate a standard mortar slog, and therefore it can save a bit on cost for the door furniture, but you are paying a little bit more for your aluminium as well. Another thing to consider is that we have 2 types of mullions, a 36 mil and a 53 mil. Sometimes the designers put in 36 mil mullions because it's thinner and it can look better. That's the look they're going for. But if the one, there is something to consider around edge cover, and it's not always a problem, but it can be. If you've got a 10 or 30 mil glass, and you've got one pane of glass and you're shuffle glazing to install that glass, often if we don't get a deep pocket on one side, we're not going to get the amount of edge cover required to conform to the glazing code. So we tend to try and always push the 53 mil mullion because it covers all bases. But if you have, say, 12 or 30 mil glazing on a project and the specification is a 36 mil mullion, please just be aware that you either need to allow for a two-piece on the side, or try and upgrade to a 53 mullion, so you're going to get sufficient edge cover, and you're not going to have to pay the glazier to maybe structurally glaze at the end of the project, which is more cost, which is siliconing the glass in rather than wedging the glass in. Or you're not going to have to change the mullions out or work out another solution. So it's just something to avoid for issues at the end of the project. So with that all in mind, I just wanted to go through an exercise of working out how I work out quantities. And I'm going to just take a couple of simple examples. I'm going to pretend that we've checked all the plans and everything aligns, the wall plan matches the details. And in this example, we'll work out a aluminium glazed door with a aluminium jamb. It's going to be in Potter's A132 series. Now, I tend to work out quantities based on the length or the amount of a length that we require, and I tend to work in quarter lengths, and I'll show you what I mean. So if we have a aluminium door and it's 2.7 high, then if we allow for the PS314 for the jamb as per this detail for each side, then one length of 5.6 meters will do the two sides. Then in this case, the head track or the head jamb is the 310 and our 316, and we can get, if we lop it into quarter of a length, so 0.25 of a length, then we have enough and some wastage. So I'm going to allow for a quarter length of both of those. Door stop, the snap-in door stop, which goes on the sides and at the head, I'm going to allow for one length for the side and a quarter length to match the head. And when I'm doing these takeoffs, I tend to work out the framing, the door components, and then the accessories. It's just how I do it, but everyone's different. So next up is the door components to make up the door. Again, there's 5.6 meters for this door style. In this case, it's our PAS 500/100. And we're going to do one length on the side, one length yes to create a full length, so one length. We have slipper plates which hide our screw holes, so we're going to have a slipper plate on each side as well, so that's a full length. A quarter length of top and bottom rail will create the top and bottom with a snap-in bead to get the glazing in, and then bead afterwards. Often overlooked but definitely necessary is our UC braces, which are pretty much act like spigots or strengtheners, and they straddle the glazing pocket here, and the screws go through the UC brace and into the rail, holds it all together. We need 4 of those, so one for each corner. We need 4 hinges, 7 meters of 6.98 mohair, and 4 hinge supports. So that's how I do a takeoff for a door frame and an aluminium glazed door. I haven't allowed for furniture, as we don't normally do that ourselves, or glazing. Then if I take the same system, A132 to the ceiling height, I'm going to chuck in a side light, and I'm just going to show you the difference in quantities. So in this case, we would have a 314 on each side plus in the middle, because in this case, it's for this detail, its detail is a 53 mullion. So we need 1.5 lengths. In this case, we're going to need half a length of head track, and we're going to have a bit of wastage in there, but we can build that in. A half a length of snapping cap. We're still going to have 1.25 lengths of door stop. Glazing adapter, which is the bit that clips into the 314 on the backside to form your mullion. We need half a length. We're going to have just over 1 meter of bottom bar and bead to form the side light. So I'm going to allow for 1/4 of a length. 1/4 of a length, or 1/4 of 5.6 meters length, also of the snap-in bead. Same quantities pretty much for the door. 1 door style, 1 slipper plate, 1/4 a length of top and bottom rail, and 1/4 a length of bead. 4 UC braces, 4 hinges, 7 meters of mohair, 4 hinge supports, and often not thought about, but there is a footing that we have for our mullions, which is a stake 314, which would go down here and brace it to the slab. And just for the final exercise, I thought I'd take you through this example of a slider. Again, to the ceiling height, 90mm stud. We're going to look at sliding the door within the wall thickness with a offsetting the glazing to one side. This is, let's just say we've taken this, extrapolated this out of a set of plans, and this is what we're working with. So again, I'd work out the vertical components, the horizontal, and then the door profiles, and then the accessories. So with that in mind, we're going to have a door receiver as per this detail, which is the PS 535. We need half a length of 332, half a length of glazing post. Then that's our vertical parts done. In this case, on the ground is the C series glazing sill. So we're going to have 1/4 length of 004, 1/4 length of bead to go with it. This has been designed with a 75mm post at the head here. So we're going to do 1/4 length, which just goes across the top here. And then the track components, which is the top track, which guides the door along the top here, half a length. Half a length of, we got 2-piece bottom track in this case, in this design. So we need a half a length of both of those. Now, just a little side note, our track is actually 5.1 meters. So that's why I've allowed for it to be 2,550 for this example. If the overall length was, say, 2.7 or 3 meters for the overall length of this opening, then I would normally just allow for a full length of track and a bit of, and that's obviously the offcut's going to be wastage unless you've got some smaller sliders somewhere. And then the door component. So one door style, again, in this case, it's going to be half a length of flat slipper, because on the back of the slider, we have a side acoustic slipper, which I'll come to in a sec. We're going to do half a length, in this case, of top and bottom door rail, half a length of bead to match. Our acoustic slipper on the back is half a length. 4 UC braces again. A smaller mohair, which is the mohair that typically works in all our door suites or inside our door profiles, which is our mohair 4.8mm. So I just basically go 1 length there, 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 1 length there. So 6 lengths times 2.7, which is the height, and then work out what's required inside the top track as well, which is the same, 4.8mm, and it comes out to roughly 22 meters. You can just always, with a slider, you can round that up to 25 meters and just copy and paste it across most of your projects. Bottom rollers, you're going to need 2 of those. Now, often overlooked, but definitely necessary, is our nylon blocks or BRG blocks. And they sit in the top of the door and keep the door tight within that top track. That is, I think, a necessary component to our sliders. It just keeps the door moving really smoothly over its lifespan. And often overlooked as well, but not 100% necessary, is a cap that goes over top of the screws. You can put a mohair in there, but the cap's easier to install because it clips in and then and avoids clashing with the screw heads. So that's again, hopefully it might be complicated for some and less complicated for others, but that just gives you an idea of how to work it out, because it's not always easy to do it as you normally would with QSing things by linear meter. It's not always going to work out. So I'd say if you can work out a method of doing it by door and window, it's going to work out more economical or more sound for you. Because often if you're doing a takeoff, you're translating those quantities at the supply stage straight into a order. And if you've got the takeoff done correctly at the takeoff stage, by the time you come to order, hopefully the data is all there ready to just be translated into an order. Right, so look, I just thought I'd take some time to just touch on some of the things that can be overlooked, and I've already kind of touched on the wastage. So if you're not allowing for, say, for example, a common one, if the partition is over 2.8 meters, most of your vertical components or your vertical sills are going to have a large amount of wastage on that project. Same goes for horizontal. You don't want to have joins in your heads because that makes it weaker. Ideally, you want full lengths where possible. And so if you've, as I mentioned an example before, if you've got 4 meters of partitioning, that's 1.6 meters of probably of wastage. You might be able to use that somewhere else if you've got a small door and window or small door, but it might be wastage, and you don't want to then reuse that 1.6 meters and then join another piece to it to form a window with a join in the head. You ideally want full lengths where possible. Not so much noteworthy for the takeoff stage, but what can be missing quite often from the order stage is beads, slipper plates, and accessories. They're often missed from orders, but if you are missing them from a takeoff, again, that's just things that could eat into your margin or your margin of error. So if you can get it all good at the takeoff stage, then it just means that you have a little bit more wriggle room at the end when you come to install. I also mentioned about furniture compatibility. This goes for a lot of things. It comes down to things like, as I mentioned before, back sets to suit doors. It can become your problem if you've installed a door style, but the locks don't fit, even if you're not supplying the hardware. Swipe cards, electronic locks, automatic door openers, all those things that can be paired with our door systems. It definitely pays to kind of, if you can, tackle it at the start, the takeoff, to make sure that if it's called out and it's not going to work, that if you can RFI it or push it back and say it's not going to work, then it's not going to trip you up later on down the line. And then I mentioned it before, but glazing versus our styles and mullions. So just for your information, our 75mm and one of our 100mm door styles accommodates up to I'll start again. The 75mm door style really should be accommodate a max glazing thickness of 6mm. One of our 100mm door styles will accommodate up to 9mm of glazing. And then our other 100mm door style and our 120mm door styles will accommodate up to 30mm glazing. And where that might trip you up is if the detail shows 75mm, but the architect or designer's called out 10mm glazing. It's very hard to make it work. There is ways around it, but it doesn't always work out well. And that could become your problem later. So if you can pick it up at the tender stage, perfect. I haven't put a lot of things here for tags, and I'm guessing everyone's got some really good tags already that go out with their tenders. But I just thought I'd touch on a few things that you should also probably make clear. Sometimes, as you're all aware, that the details don't always highlight. They're not real clear, and sometimes it might look like there's mullions on the floor plan, but then in elevation you can't see any, or vice versa. So I would just add tags in there around that, whether you've allowed for silicon joints or for mullions where necessary. And I would tag any and all detail, tag any of the things that are really unclear. So, for example, if it's unclear what kind of mullion size that you should allow for, then just tag it that which one you have allowed for, and why, if necessary. For example, if it's 12 mil glazing, just tag it that you've allowed for the thicker, the wider, the mullion to conform to the glazing code. Tag where you can around the glass thickness limits, RE styles. So if I'm ever doing a takeoff and there's not a lot of information around the glazing, I will say I will generally allow for the 100 mil door style, and I will always tag that it's accommodating a max glazing thickness of 9 mil. If you've got any glazed corners and there's no details around that, just say whether you've allowed for a silicon butt joint, or whether if you chuck in a corner post, just tag that. Where sometimes you don't have partition heights, so sometimes you're just working off a floor plan. If you're working out off a floor plan and you're working out the quantities, just make sure that you do say this accommodates up to 2.7 meter high partitions, and anything over that is going to be additional. Any of the details that are not included versus what your assumptions are. So sometimes often you'll have plans that really just don't have any typical details. They don't have a lot of information, and you have to make a heap of assumptions. For every assumption you make, I think you should tag that and make sure that you make it real clear what you've allowed for. And obviously everything that you haven't allowed for. So i.e. I haven't allowed for mullions, or haven't allowed for glazing, or haven't allowed for door furniture. You're probably all over that, but obviously the clearer you are, the better it'll be for you. And finally, where's it finally? Oh yeah, finally, what to do when there is not many details. So, man, often I will get given something that's drawn on the back of a napkin, or something that's really unclear. But if the first thing I would try and, I guess the first thing to work out is this thing cost driven? If it is, then maybe we need to look at something like the C series and try and really reduce the glass thickness, where glass thickness is going to be where a lot of your cost is. So if it's cost driven, if they're trying to do it as cheap as possible, then reduce the amount of glazing, reduce the size of the aluminium partitions. But it's not always cost driven. So if not, how to work out your quantities? Well, I always think that there is generally a design intention, a look that they're trying to achieve, whether it be the steel look, where they're trying to keep the aluminium thin but have lots of mullions and lots of transoms. It could be more around like it could be a school environment, so we need to work. It needs to be rigid. It needs to be robust. It could be that they're trying to get a really thick border around the glazing, so we need to beef up the aluminium. So from that, ideally, like anything would help, but renders are really good. Sometimes you get a render and then you can work it out. Elevations help because they can show you whether, if there is a certain look, like lots of transoms, lots of mullions. Sometimes we can pull it out of the specification if it's there, or just the overall look. Sometimes we have to design it based on what the hardware requirements are, i.e. are there swipe cards or access points. Or sometimes it might be that it's a meeting room in a lawyer's firm and you need to have acoustic seals. So we need to look at that. So, for example, if we are dealing with something with acoustic seals or a meeting room, and they really want to beef up the acoustics as much as possible, I'm going to recommend one of our wider series in the 105 or 132. So A105, E105, or the A132 or the E132 suites, and then trying to integrate some Raven seals. So if it's acoustics, I would try and beef up the width so we can get in some butty acoustic seals around the jams. If it is the steel look and you get some renders or something, or someone sent you a picture of what they're trying to achieve and the look, I would go for the Soho series or the C series, and work out the quantities based on that. And then it's down to kind of what are the spacings of the mullions, what are the spacings of the transoms, and those are all, I guess, things you can allow for in your takeoffs. But yeah, the more you can get a mood board going, the easier it will be to definitely to work out the design intention and then work it out. So that pretty much is it. I imagine there's probably some people it might be like a lot too much information, and for others it might be that you've got more questions now than anything else. With that in mind, I've just put my email address there. If you want to jot that down, I'm happy to help anytime. You can just email me to josh.h@potters.co.nz. We can have a chat and we can work through takeoffs. We can offer training. But every job is different, and some of them are, a lot of times the designer might be trying to design things that are outside of what's in our standard specifications, and we can make that work. And there is a difference of capping versus planting on, all that kind of stuff as well. But we just have to work through it as a project by project basis.
Mm-hmm.
So,
hey, Josh, a question's just come through for you, which was how would you start a takeoff working by floor? I'm sorry, working floor by floor or wall and window?
cool. I'll just stop sharing my screen for a second. So when I think the longest part, in my opinion, is trawling through the plans and then working out a game plan, and that is often just getting all the information, collating it in my mind to work out that this is the design intention, these are the typical details, versus these are the doors and windows, versus this is the hardware. Once I kind of got it all sorted in my head, I approach it from ideally from the door and window schedule. So either exporting that into a spreadsheet or just going door by door and window by window. And I would typically go off the door and window schedule, because then I can, it's often all there in a grid format, and it's often all there with the supplier next to it. So for example, I might say door number 1, Potters A132 series. So once I've kind of got all that, I put it across the top of a spreadsheet, all the ones that I have to allow for. I leave out all the ones that aren't going to be Potters, and then I start putting the part numbers down the side, and then I work out the quantities by door and by window. That's just how I do it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Got another question for you. What should you do when NTTs come through or revisions?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. I guess maybe that's why a lot of people leave the quotes to the last minute, and try and get us to quote a day before the tender closes. It's a tricky one, because I find the more you kind of keep revisiting a project, the more things can go wrong. Because if you're constantly trying to change the quantities you've already got, for starters, your mind's already gone to other projects, and so revisiting a project for takeoffs is like starting afresh. So it does get tricky. I would tend to try and deal with it. I would just do the takeoff at the start, and then ideally try and tend to it a bit later, if possible, because there might be multiple entities.
Right.
You can do it as you go, but I find that frustrating if there's lots of changes on the way. Constantly revisiting a project can get really confusing.
Yeah. All right. Difficult one, that one. Josh, do you allow for steel and track locks in your takeoffs?
If asked for, I don't always, but yeah, we can do. If we do, then we get Tracklog to do the markup if it isn't already done, and then we can allow for the quantities. We would just make assumptions on the plenum height and maybe tag that. But yeah, we can work out the steel.
Right, right. Okay, sounds good. Here's an interesting one. If taking off partitions with custom powder coating, do you allow a few sort of extra lengths additional in case of damage or there's some fault with the coatings and things like that?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I would say anything other than black is custom powder coating because we do have to send it to the powder coaters. I would, so when I do if I do a takeoff for a customer, it's tight. So if they want to allow for extra lengths, I would recommend it. And it would be on the things, for example, on head track or on jam seals where there is a lot of the same thing. I would maybe order an extra couple of lengths for sure. Yeah, yeah, yes is the question, is the answer to that
The
question.
answer there, isn't it? Yeah, just to cover themselves. Yeah. Another question. What's the complications around using two series together, say an A132 with a C45? Is it possible?
It's definitely possible. The only times you wouldn't use it a lot, but you could have it so that the A132 is capping the wall and then you're planting on the C series. Or in some cases, I've seen it where the A132 wide mullion, so 132 mil wide mullion, is then joined with a 45 mil bottom and top seal. Maybe there's no real complications around that. I typically think you'd either stick to one or the other. But a lot of our projects, for example, if you're doing a sliding door and then you have some hinge doors, it will be a combination of the DS, the E, the C, and the A132 in that one project. So often, all our, sorry, just going back a step, all of our suites are compatible with each other. And you might sometimes often use a multitude of suites to complete a project. But yeah, there's no real dramas in combining them.
Doing that. Fantastic, fantastic. Look, that's all the questions we've got through so far. Certainly, I guess if anyone thinks of anything afterwards, I mean, Josh certainly had his email address up on the screen there before. If you didn't catch it, you can certainly send any questions through to us at the AWCI office, and we'll happily pass that on to Josh as well. As we mentioned earlier, we've recorded this webinar and we'll make it available to all our members. So if anyone wants a copy or needs it, quite soon, just feel free to, email us through to the office, and we can send that out to you. Actually, hang on, we've had one more come through. Sorry, Josh, for you.
That's all right.
Do you include screws for hinges, partitions, or do you recommend in tags?
I don't always allow for. I'll often allow for, say, door screws, which you need to build a door. I don't myself allow for screws. It is a small ticket item. For example, if you're screwing our partitions together, it's normally a 32 mil drill point fine thread screw, and those aren't too expensive. But you could probably either build that into your margin wastage or just allow for it when you're doing the takeoff. We don't always allow for hinge screws either, but look, we can add them in if absolutely if necessary.
All right, good stuff. Hey, look, Josh, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming along, and thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar. We really appreciate it. We won't take up too much more of your time, but as we say, Josh is certainly available. Email us at the AWC office, and we can certainly help. So with that, we'll close the webinar today, and thank everyone for the time. Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
mate.
you for your time.
We'll be in touch. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.